From the famous Horsehead Cliff in Wuyi Mountain, I bring you today Tielouhan. Hey everyone, this is Sigi, and I've been on a bit of a Yan Cha kick lately, it seems. Because today, that is what I'm bringing you. Namely, the Matouyan Tieluohan. Or translated, Horsehead Cliff, Iron Monk, or a Ahat, or however you want to translate it. That Tielouhan word is a bit difficult in that sense. But yeah, so what is this? This tea was harvested in 2021, and it was harvested on the famous Matou cliff, Matouyan. Now, if you haven't heard of Matouyan before, it is both one of the oldest named cliffs in all of Wuyishan and one of the most famous. However, the tea it's most famous for is Rogwe, not Tielouhan. What can I tell you about Matouyan, despite being famous for Rogwe, which we coincidentally also offer on nannuoshan, so check that one out if you haven't yet. But Matouyan is at around 425 meters altitude. It is part of the so-called Zhengyan region of Wuyishan, the, if you want to translate it, true or proper cliff region, kind of the most prestigious area for Yan Cha. It is bordered by Dawang Peak to the east, Tianyou Peak to the south, Sanyang Peak to the west, and Jiulongke to the north. So it's kind of right in there. And because it is a cliff, the tea that is planted on Matouyan gets a lot of sunlight, especially compared to tea that's grown, for example, in like valleys or in groves or those kind of places, which, at least according to what I've read, is supposed to give it a kind of stronger fragrance profile. However, and this seems to be something that is really important for tea from Matouyan, is not its most distinguishing factor. One thing that Chinese tea drinkers often like to say about Matouyan is "xiang qi yi cheng, zi wei nan qiu," and what that means is that tea with this kind of fragrance, this kind of sharper, stronger, more intense fragrance, is easy to find. But what's almost impossible to find is tea with the same kind of flavor as tea from Matouyan. This specific cliff in Wuyishan seems to have a distinct flavor profile, and that is what people who are connoisseurs of Matouyan seem to be looking for. While, as I said, a lot of this is specifically about the Matouyan Rogwe, given that we are also drinking a Yan Cha from Matouyan today, it might be interesting to compare the Rogwe and this Tielouhan and look at what kind of the similarities are, and if we can maybe distill this particular flavor essence that people seem to be looking for. However, today I'm just drinking this Tielouhan. I have tried this tea before in the context of sourcing it for nannuoshan. It was one of the teas I enjoyed the most during our entire sourcing session, and as such, it ended up on the nannuoshan shop, where you can find it for $73 for 50 grams on the US shop, and 66 euros for 50 grams on the EU shop. So this is not a cheap tea by any means. This is something special. Of course, Matouyan is a big name, and as such, as is often the case with Chinese tea, the big name carries a big price tag. Let's see today if that price tag is really worth it. I've got 6 grams of Matouyan Tieluohan here in my trusty 100 milliliter gaiwan, and I would like to use water that's boiling. So we need to wait just a little moment for that. Tieluohan is a Yan Cha cultivar that tends to be processed in a way that isn't as much about fragrance, but is more focused on texture, mouthfeel, and it tends to be one of the higher roasted types. So often, if you have Tieluohan, you will find that it ends up being more towards the high roast end of the Yan Cha spectrum. Given what we've learned about the specific characteristics of Matouyan tea so far, with it being more distinct in terms of flavor and a bit less unique in terms of fragrance, I think this could be well suited towards Tieluohan because the flavor might be brought out more if the tea is also processed in a way that emphasizes how it acts in your mouth rather than, for example, to your nose. But don't get me wrong, this tea still smells really, really good. The aromatic intensity of this tea is, I'd say, not as high as it would be with some other Yan Cha. Going by smell, this is definitely on the end of higher roast as well. Really nice. Especially like empty pitcher smell on Yan Cha is always amazing. And while my water is still hot, I'm just gonna go ahead and pour the second steep. Okay, there we go. This also gives me a little time to let the first steep cool down so I don't just drink impossibly hot tea. But yeah, so what we're expecting here, both going by the smell and by kind of Tieluohan tendencies, something that's not as intense and fragrance forward as other Yan Cha, but instead something that gives us a bit more both in the flavor category, maybe something a bit unique on that end, and something with a very nice and pleasant, perhaps a little bit oily mouthfeel. Okay, here's steep number 2. And yeah, you can already see from the color here, this is a nice kind of dark amber. Definitely not too light of a roast here. Nothing super dark either, of course. Those are like a different category altogether. But I'm very curious to get into this tea. Before I do, if you enjoy me doing these videos for nannuoshan, and if you enjoy me delving into things like Yan Cha as well and not just pu'er all the time, please leave a like on this video. Maybe comment a bit about your own Yan Cha experiences. Have you ever had a tea from Matouyan? If so, was there anything that you found quite distinct about it? And of course, don't forget to subscribe to nannuoshan on YouTube if you haven't yet. It's always highly appreciated. Cheers. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah, this is very interesting. Like I've said, I've already had this tea before during the sourcing session. So drinking it here again it's like not too much of a surprise. But this is definitely an excellent tea. There is a sense of kind of layeredness to this tea's taste. You get to experience all the different layers one by one and then how they integrate with each other as the tea moves into your mouth, across your tongue, and towards your throat, and then back up again. It's a very, maybe it's weird to say this, but it is a very sensory experience in a way, because you can really hone in on your sense of taste and your sense of smell to experience this tea and just focus on it while more or less ignoring everything else. There's a lot going on here. I do get that stronger roast and more traditional mouthfeel oriented processing style on this tea. And I think it just suits it perfectly well. I think this tea is remarkably balanced overall between its different aspects. Like, the fragrance isn't coming on too strong. It supports the unique and distinct flavor of the tea quite nicely. The level of roasting integrates extremely well with what's there. The mouthfeel is impeccable, of course, and it all combines to create an experience that is not just interesting for each of its individual aspects, but also very kind of balanced and harmonious overall. Okay, while I drink the second steep, I'm gonna get started on a third one, as is custom here. I do 3 steeps. In order to really figure out what the kind of terroir of Matouyan is, I think we would have to do a much, much deeper dive and sample a whole bunch of different teas. On top of that, I've also heard that within Matouyan, there are also 6 distinct micro areas. Unfortunately, I don't remember their names right now, but the characteristics in each of these micro areas, of course, depending on where on the cliff they are and what their specific kind of microclimate and fauna and flora is, it will produce different tastes. The amount of kind of sunlight that those teas get might differ. And as such, I'd be curious to see if all 6 of these areas actually do have what people describe as the kind of characteristic Matouyan flavor. But that's for future me to find out. Definitely a very kind of interesting thing to pursue, I think. Okay. We've got our 3rd steep in here. Oh. I mean, even if they say that this kind of fragrance is easy to find, it still just smells really wonderful, I think. I think this is just a really delicious tea. And it does well in so many different categories. I genuinely do think that you would miss out if you didn't give this one a try. Yeah, I really like this slightly more traditional style of processing because it just feels so nice as you drink it. One thing that I tend to not enjoy as much about the lighter roast Yan Cha is the mouthfeel. I think it can often be kind of a little forgotten about or not really engaging. But this is exactly where teas like this, with this more traditional processing, tend to shine. And I think it's such an, at the same time, important but also slightly undervalued area of tea. I know I've gone on this kind of mini rant a couple of times, but when we drink, we don't just care about what we taste with our taste buds and what we smell with our noses. The feeling and the feedback we get from our entire oral cavity as we drink a tea is also something that contributes to the overall impression in a really important way, and that is a factor that we shouldn't forget about. On the contrary, I at least think that it is one of the most important factors when it comes to whether a tea is actually good and enjoyable or just fine. Oh, such a nice smell. Yeah, it isn't just our 2 senses of taste and smell. It is also the sense of touch and all of the feedback we get from that that creates the overall impression of our tea. And it's important to pay attention to that part as well. This tea still does really well on this longer steep. I do get a little bit of like a dark chocolate type of bitterness coming through now that wasn't there before. So it definitely reacted to being pushed. And it's giving a bit of a push back, but it's still very enjoyable. Also a little more kind of viscous this time. But due to that slight hit of bitterness, it's not without an edge. I think for personal consumption, I probably wouldn't have steeped it as long. I do think it's a bit more kind of harmonious and balanced with these slightly shorter steeps that I was doing before. But it's nice to see that this tea still remains kind of very interesting and engaging if we push it a bit more. Whew, phenomenal tea. Really. Oh, and it smells so nice too. Yeah, it's just good in every regard. Please, if you have the chance, give this one a try and let me know what you think. I, for one, am done with this review now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time, maybe with more Yan Cha. Goodbye.